A young boy stops a wealthy CEO and says, "Hey, mister, I saw your picture in our family album." The billionaire is stunned, caught off guard by the boy's statement. The lobby of Harrison Tower was alive with holiday spirit. A massive Christmas tree stood in the middle, decorated with ornaments and glowing lights. People hurried by, their chatter mixing with the soft music playing in the background. Snowflakes from the chilly New York air melted on the shiny marble floor, and the smell of pine mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee from the corner cafe. Lucas Harrison, the man whose name was on the building, walked through the lobby, ignoring the festive mood. His tailored coat swayed as he moved quickly, and his leather briefcase tapped against the floor. His sharp, handsome face showed no emotion. Lucas was a man who didn't have time for distractions, especially during the busy end of the year. To him, Christmas was about business profits and reports, not personal feelings. His phone buzzed. Without slowing down, Lucas pulled it from his pocket. "Yes?" he said sharply, maneuvering around a group of carolers near the entrance. As he reached the elevators, a small tug on his coat made him stop. It was a gentle pull, like someone trying to get his attention. Looking down, Lucas saw a boy, no older than 7, staring up at him with big eyes. The boy had a round, freckled face and messy brown hair peeking out from under a knit hat. His puffy coat looked a bit too big, as if it had been passed down. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said, his voice steady despite his size. "I saw your picture in our family album." Lucas blinked, surprised. "I think you're mistaken," he replied, his tone firm but not harsh. "I don't know you." "You're Lucas Harrison, right?" the boy asked, undeterred. His small hands were stuffed in his coat pockets, and he shifted from foot to foot, either from nerves or the cold air coming in through the doors. "Yes," Lucas said, raising an eyebrow. "How do you know my name?" The boy grinned. "Because it's on your building." Lucas allowed a small smile. "Clever, but I'm not in your photo album." "You are," the boy insisted, his voice serious. "I saw the picture yesterday. It's old, from a long time ago. You're standing next to my grandpa, Jack. You were in his diner." Lucas's smile faded, replaced by a frown. "Jack," he repeated, as if the name sounded vaguely familiar. "What's your name, kid?" "Ben," the boy said proudly. "My mom works upstairs. She's cleaning offices right now. I come with her sometimes when school's out." Lucas glanced around the lobby. The boy's mention of his mother's job explained his presence, but the connection to a diner owner named Jack seemed unlikely. He adjusted his briefcase and moved toward the elevator. "Listen, Ben, I've got a meeting. Nice to meet you, but I think you've got the wrong guy." "I'm not wrong," Ben insisted, stepping in front of Lucas. His face showed determination and frustration, the kind only a child could have. "The picture's real. I can show you if you want." Lucas sighed, checking his watch. His first instinct was to walk away. He didn't have time for this. But something about Ben's unwavering gaze and the conviction in his voice made him pause. Kids didn't just make up things like this, did they? And why would this boy, whose mother cleaned offices in his building, claim something so strange? "I really don't have time for this," Lucas muttered, more to himself than Ben. Still, he found himself asking, "Where is this photo?" "At our apartment," Ben said quickly, as if he'd been waiting for the question. "It's not far. You can come see it." Lucas almost laughed at the boldness of the suggestion. "I don't think that's going to happen." Ben's excitement faded for the first time. "But it's true," he said quietly, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "Grandpa Jack always said he helped someone important a long time ago. He called you Lucas. When I saw your picture, I knew it was you." The mention of the name again stirred something faint in Lucas's memory, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't the time or place to entertain a child's imagination. "Look, Ben," he said, crouching slightly to meet the boy's eye level. "I'm sure your grandpa was a great guy, but I'm not the person you think I am. I've got to go. Ben's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, Lucas felt a twinge of guilt. But before he could stand up, Ben spoke again, softer this time. Grandpa Jack said you'd come back one day, the boy murmured. He said you'd remember. Lucas froze. The words hit him with unexpected weight, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe the boy wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe there was something, some faint connection he had buried under years of ambition and success. But before he could dwell on it, the elevator doors opened behind him, and a group of executives stepped out, nodding in acknowledgement. He stood abruptly. "Take care, Ben," he said, his voice brisk and detached once more. Without another glance, Lucas stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a quiet chime. As the elevator rose, his reflection stared back at him from the mirrored walls. He shook his head, dismissing the boy's claim as a strange coincidence. But in the back of his mind, a single name lingered, Jack, and with it, the faintest hint of a memory he couldn't quite place. Lucas couldn't shake the boy's words from his mind. As the elevator climbed to the top floors of Harrison Tower, his thoughts wandered. The name Jack echoed in his memory, like the faint outline of a forgotten melody. He could picture Ben's earnest face and hear the unshakable certainty in his small voice. Grandpa Jack said you'd come back one day. He said you'd remember. By the time Lucas reached his office, he had already dismissed the encounter as a fluke. He told himself it was nothing more than a momentary distraction, a peculiar coincidence that didn't deserve further thought. But when his assistant placed a stack of documents on his desk and asked if he wanted his usual coffee, he found himself replying, "Not yet." Instead of diving into his work, Lucas leaned back in his chair, staring out at the New York skyline. The boy's claim nagged at him. He prided himself on his logical mind, yet the strange familiarity of the name and the circumstances tugged at the edges of his memory. What if there was something to it? What if the boy was telling the truth? It wasn't every day that someone tugged at his coat and claimed to know him from a family photo album. An hour later, he was still thinking about it. "Lucas, you're being ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. He tried to focus on the financial projections in front of him, but the words blurred together. With an exasperated sigh, he stood and grabbed his coat. Before he could talk himself out of it, he was back in the elevator, heading to the lobby. When the door slid open, Lucas scanned the room. Ben was still there, sitting on a bench near the Christmas tree, swinging his legs and humming along to the carols playing overhead. His hat was crooked, and his coat had slipped off one shoulder, but he looked up instantly when Lucas approached. "You came back." Ben's face lit up with a mix of surprise and triumph. Lucas cleared his throat, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "I've got a few minutes," he said, trying to sound indifferent. "Let's see this photo you're talking about." Ben's grin widened. He hopped off the bench, grabbed his coat, and motioned for Lucas to follow him. "It's not far. Mom says we're only 3 blocks from here." Lucas hesitated for a moment but nodded, gesturing for Ben to lead the way. As they stepped out into the crisp winter air, the boy's excitement was contagious. He talked nonstop about the Christmas lights in their neighborhood, the snowman he built last week, and how his mom let him put the star on their tiny tree. Lucas listened with half an ear, his mind racing with questions. The walk was shorter than he expected, and before he knew it, they were standing outside an old brick building. The small lobby smelled faintly of wood and cooking, and Ben led the way to a narrow staircase. "We're on the 3rd floor," he said, bounding ahead. Lucas followed at a slower pace, glancing around at the chipped paint and worn railings. When they reached the apartment, Ben pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the door. The space was modest and tidy, with mismatched furniture and cheerful holiday decorations. A small tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling brightly, and the scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. A stack of neatly folded laundry sat on the couch, and a pair of work boots rested near the door. "Mom's still at work," Ben said, kicking off his shoes. "But I can show you the picture. It's in here." He darted to a cabinet and pulled out an old, worn photo album. Lucas stood awkwardly near the doorway, unsure what to do with himself. He hadn't been in a place like this in years, not since his own days of scraping by in cramped apartments. It felt strange, being here now, surrounded by reminders of a life he'd long left behind. "Here it is," Ben exclaimed, flipping the album open to a specific page. He held it up triumphantly. Lucas stepped closer, his skepticism fading as he stared at the photo. It was a Polaroid, slightly faded but unmistakably him. He looked younger, barely out of his teens, wearing a worn apron and standing beside a heavy-set man with a kind smile. Behind them was the unmistakable backdrop of a diner, complete with a jukebox and red leather booths. Written in loopy handwriting at the bottom of the photo were the words, "Lucas and Jack, 1994. For a moment, Lucas couldn't speak. The memories rushed back in fragments. A warm smile, a steady hand on his shoulder, the clatter of dishes, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. "Grandpa Jack said you were his best worker," Ben said proudly. "He always talked about you. He said you worked hard and didn't give up even when things were tough." Lucas felt his throat tighten. He remembered now. Jack had taken a chance on him when no one else would. At 18, he'd been broke, desperate, and angry at the world. Jack had given him more than just a job. He'd given him a lifeline, a place to belong, and a sense of purpose. "He talked about me?" Lucas asked, his voice quieter than he intended. "All the time," Ben said, flipping through the album to show more photos of the diner and Jack. "He said you were smart and would do something big one day. He said you'd come back and visit." Lucas swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the weight of his success in a way he hadn't before. He had built an empire, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten the people who had helped him get there. "I didn't know he kept this," Lucas said, gesturing to the photo. Ben beamed. Grandpa kept everything that was important. Lucas nodded slowly, staring at the picture as if it held answers to questions he didn't yet know how to ask. He glanced around the small apartment, his gaze lingering on the tree, the handmade decorations, and the photo album filled with memories. "Thank you for showing me this," he said finally, handing the album back to Ben. "Your grandpa. He was a good man." Ben nodded solemnly. "He said you were too." Lucas's chest tightened again. He wasn't sure what to say, so he simply patted Ben on the shoulder and stood. "I should let you get back to your evening." "Wait," Ben said quickly. "Do you want to stay for dinner? Mom will be back soon, and she makes really good spaghetti." Lucas hesitated, his hand on the door. For a moment he considered it. But then his phone buzzed, pulling him back to the reality of deadlines, meetings, and expectations. "Maybe another time," he said with a faint smile. "You take care, Ben." As he stepped back into the cold evening air, Lucas felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest, a strange mix of nostalgia, guilt, and something he couldn't quite name. The photo was burned into his memory now, along with Jack's smile and Ben's hopeful gaze. Lucas walked back to Harrison Tower, with Ben's words replaying in his mind. The image of the Polaroid lingered in his thoughts, like a ghost from the past. It wasn't just the photo itself. It was what it represented. The moment he'd seen Jack's face again, memories he hadn't thought about in years had rushed back in a vivid blur. Jack's diner had been more than just a job. It had been a sanctuary at a time when his world felt like it was crumbling. He remembered it now. The smell of greasy burgers and fresh coffee, the hum of the jukebox in the corner, and the way Jack always greeted every customer with a warmth that could thaw even the coldest winter night. Back then, Lucas had been a lanky teenager with a chip on his shoulder and a life filled with uncertainty. His father had left, and his mother was working double shifts to keep the lights on. Lucas, bitter and desperate to help, had stumbled into Jack's diner looking for work. Jack had taken one look at him, handed him an apron and said, "The grill's hot, kid. You up for it?" Lucas hadn't realized it at the time, but that was the moment everything started to change. Back in his office, Lucas tried to return to his routine, but focus eluded him. The polished desk, the towering windows overlooking the city, and the hum of his laptop all felt hollow. He kept thinking about the way Ben had looked at him, with admiration and hope, like Lucas was still the person Jack had believed in all those years ago. He thought about what Ben had said. Grandpa Jack said you were smart and would do something big one day. He said you'd come back and visit. Lucas hadn't visited. He hadn't even thought about Jack in years. He'd been too busy chasing success, climbing the corporate ladder and building his empire. And now Jack was gone. The realization hit him harder than he expected. The next day, Lucas found himself standing outside the diner that had once been Jack's. The place was unrecognizable now. The cheerful neon sign that had once read Jack's Place was gone, replaced by a generic sign for a dry cleaner. The windows were dark, the interior gutted and sterile. Lucas felt a pang of guilt as he stared at the empty space. He thought about all the times Jack had told him, "You'll do great things one day, Lucas. Just don't forget where you came from." And he had forgotten. He'd forgotten Jack's kindness, his laughter, and the way he believed in a scrappy kid who barely believed in himself. Now it was too late to thank him. The guilt gnawed at Lucas as he returned to his office. He couldn't shake the image of Ben's on his face, nor could he ignore the weight of the Polaroid in his memory. Jack had kept that photo all these years, and Ben's family had treated it like a treasure. It was more than just a picture. It was a testament to the bond they'd shared. That evening, Lucas found himself dialing the number his assistant had tracked down for Ben's mother, Sarah. He felt awkward as he waited for her to pick up, unsure of what he would even say. When she answered, her voice was cautious but polite. "Miss Carter, this is Lucas Harrison," he said, feeling the formality in his tone. "I met your son yesterday in the lobby. He showed me something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about." There was a brief pause on the other end before Sarah responded. "Ben mentioned meeting you. He was so excited when he got home." Lucas exhaled, relieved she didn't sound upset. "I wanted to thank him for showing me that photo. It brought back memories I didn't even realize I'd forgotten." Sarah's voice softened. "My father always talked about you, Mr. Harrison. He said you were one of the hardest working people he'd ever met." Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. "Your father, Jack, he changed my life. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for him. I'm sorry I never got the chance to tell him that." Sarah was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with quiet understanding. "He knew, Mr. Harrison. He always said he didn't need a thank you. Seeing you succeed was enough for him." Lucas's chest tightened at her words. For a man who had built his entire life around achieving more, the simplicity of Jack's perspective was humbling. Success wasn't about accolades or wealth. It was about the people you helped along the way. "Thank you," Lucas said, his voice low. "That means more than I can say." He hesitated, then added, "Would it be all right if I stopped by again? I'd like to talk more about your father and about how I can help." Sarah sounded surprised, but not displeased. "Of course. Ben would be thrilled to see you again." When Lucas arrived at their apartment the next evening, Ben was waiting at the door, bouncing on his heels with excitement. "You came back," he exclaimed, his grin as wide as ever. Lucas chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "I told you that photo got me thinking." They sat together in the small living room, flipping through the photo album once more. Sarah shared stories about her father, how he built the diner from nothing, how he'd always had time for everyone, and how much joy it brought him to see people gather there. Lucas listened intently, his guarded demeanor softening with every story. "I wish you could have seen the diner back then," Sarah said, her eyes distant with memory. "It was always so full of life. Dad loved it. He used to say it wasn't just a place to eat, it was a place where people belong." Lucas nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. Jack had given him a place to belong when he needed it most. Now, decades later, he felt the pull to honor that gift. Before he left that night, Lucas paused at the door. "Sarah," he said, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant, "if there's anything I can do for you and Ben, please let me know. Your father did so much for me. It's the least I can do." Sarah smiled, her expression warm but firm. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. But we're doing okay. Just hearing that my dad made such a difference in your life, that's enough." Lucas nodded. But as he walked back to his car, he couldn't help feeling like it wasn't enough. Jack had given him a second chance when he needed it most. Now, it was Lucas's turn to give back. Lucas couldn't shake the visit from his mind. That small apartment, filled with warmth despite its modesty, lingered in his thoughts long after he left. Ben's excitement, Sarah's quiet strength, and the stories of Jack's unyielding kindness stayed with him as he returned to the sleek, impersonal solitude of his penthouse. His home was immaculate and cold, all sharp lines and modern furniture, designed for someone who was too busy to linger in it for long. For the first time, Lucas saw it for what it was, a place to sleep, not a home. He set his briefcase on the counter and glanced at the untouched Christmas tree in the corner, a decoration his assistant had arranged to be delivered earlier in the month. Its white and silver ornaments glittered in the dim light, but it felt lifeless compared to the cheerful chaos of Ben and Sarah's tree, strung with handmade garlands and mismatched baubles. Lucas sighed, loosening his tie. He couldn't ignore the sense of unease that had settled over him since the night before. He'd told Sarah to let him know if he could help, but she had politely brushed off the offer. Yet it was clear to him now she needed help, even if she wouldn't say so. The next morning, Lucas made a point to clear his schedule. He couldn't focus on quarterly reports or business strategies, not when his mind kept wandering back to that photo and the family who had welcomed him into their home without hesitation. He found himself walking back to their building, unsure what he was going to say, but knowing he couldn't leave things as they were. When Sarah opened the door, she looked surprised but not displeased to see him. She wore an apron dusted with flour, and the smell of something baking wafted into the hallway. "Mr. Harrison," she said with a smile, stepping aside to let him in. "I wasn't expecting you." "Lucas," he corrected, feeling out of place in his tailored coat and polished shoes. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Sarah replied, gesturing for him to sit on the worn but comfortable couch. Ben was on the floor, surrounded by crayons and paper, drawing what looked like a snowman. He looked up and grinned. "Hi, Mr. Harrison." "Lucas," he repeated with a small smile. "What are you working on, Ben?" "A Christmas card for Mom," Ben said proudly, holding up the half-finished drawing. "She says she doesn't need one, but I think everyone needs a Christmas card." Lucas nodded, his chest tightening at the boy's earnestness. "That's very thoughtful of you." As Sarah returned to the kitchen, Lucas took in the details of the apartment he hadn't noticed before. The furniture was secondhand but clean, the walls adorned with family photos and Ben's artwork. It was clear that Sarah had made the most of what little they had, but there was no denying the signs of struggle. The faded paint, the patched-up upholstery, the careful organization of every corner. It all spoke of someone doing their best to get by with limited resources. "You're off work today?" Lucas asked as Sarah reappeared with a tray of coffee and cookies. "Just for the afternoon," she said, setting the tray down. "I work evenings at the restaurant most days, and mornings here in the building." "You do both?" Lucas asked, surprised. Sarah shrugged, her expression calm but tired. "It's what I have to do to make sure Ben has everything he needs." Lucas nodded slowly, guilt gnawing at him again. He'd once been in a position not so different from hers, juggling jobs and worrying about where the next paycheck would come from. But that had been decades ago. Now, he couldn't remember the last time he'd worried about money, or about anything that didn't involve his business. As they talked, Sarah shared more about her life. She had moved to the city a few years after her father's passing, hoping for better opportunities. But between raising Ben and the rising cost of living, things had been harder than she anticipated. Still, she spoke with a quiet determination that reminded Lucas of Jack. "Your father must have been so proud of you," he said sincerely. Sarah smiled, her gaze softening. "He always said I was strong. I think I get that from him." Ben climbed onto the couch beside Lucas, holding out one of his drawings. "Do you like it?" he asked, pointing to a colorful snowman with a crooked hat. "It's great," Lucas said, studying the picture. "You're a talented artist." "Thanks," Ben said, beaming. "Mom says I get that from Grandpa. He used to draw funny pictures for me when I was little." Lucas felt a pang in his chest. Jack had given so much to the people around him, and now his daughter and grandson were carrying on his legacy of strength and kindness. Yet they were doing so with so little, while Lucas had everything and more. Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, "Would you let me take you both to dinner?" "My treat." Sarah hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. "That's kind of you, but we really don't need—" "I insist." Lucas interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "It would mean a lot to me." Sarah exchanged a glance with Ben, who looked up at her, hopefully. After a moment, she nodded. "All right, but only if Ben can pick the place." "Yes," Ben said, pumping his fist. "Can we go to Big Joe's Pizzeria? They have the best pepperoni ever." Lucas chuckled, relieved. "Big Joe's it is." That evening, they sat together in a cozy corner booth at the bustling pizzeria, sharing stories and laughter over steaming plates of pizza. Ben peppered Lucas with questions about his work, his favorite foods, and whether he'd ever ridden a horse. Sarah watched them with a smile, her usual weariness replaced by something lighter. As the evening wore on, Lucas found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He told them about his early days working at the diner, about the lessons Jack had taught him, and about how those lessons had shaped his life. Ben listened with wide-eyed wonder, while Sarah nodded in quiet understanding. "You've done a lot," Sarah said as they walked back to their apartment later that night. "I think my dad would be proud of you." Lucas swallowed hard, her words striking a chord deep within him. "I hope so," he said quietly. When they reached the apartment, Sarah turned to him. "Thank you for tonight." "It was really nice," Sarah said, her voice warm. Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you for letting me spend time with you. It's been a long time since I felt grounded." Sarah smiled, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence. Then Ben tugged at Lucas's sleeve. "You'll come back, right?" Lucas looked down at the boy, his heart full in a way he hadn't expected. "I will," he promised. As he walked away, the cold night air biting at his face, Lucas felt something shift within him. For years he'd measured his success by the size of his bank account and the reach of his business. But now, he was starting to realize that success meant something entirely different. It meant people. It meant connection. It meant giving back, just like Jack had. And Lucas was determined to do exactly that. Lucas's promise to visit again weighed on his mind more than he anticipated. He wasn't used to making promises like that. Not to anyone, let alone a little boy who barely knew him. But something about Ben and Sarah, their warmth and resilience despite their modest circumstances, had gotten under his skin. It had been years since Lucas had felt a genuine connection with anyone outside the world of business. His life had become a carefully managed cycle of meetings, deadlines, and strategy sessions, punctuated by occasional gala appearances or vacation trips that felt more like obligations than escapes. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed over pizza or shared stories with someone without checking his watch. That night, as he sat in his penthouse surrounded by glittering views of the city, Lucas couldn't stop replaying the evening at Big Joe's. Ben's curiosity and enthusiasm, Sarah's quiet strength, and the easy camaraderie they'd shared. It was a stark contrast to the hollow silence that filled his own home. His gaze drifted to the Christmas tree in the corner, still untouched. He had paid someone to set it up, but he hadn't so much as plugged in the lights. The ornaments, perfectly coordinated and expensive, looked sterile compared to the handmade ones on Sarah's tree. It wasn't just the tree, though. Everything about his life felt like that, polished, impressive, but devoid of the warmth that made a home. Lucas poured himself a glass of water and stared at the skyline, thinking about Jack. The stories Sarah had shared about her father made him feel both proud and ashamed. Jack had believed in Lucas before anyone else had, and Lucas had built his success on the foundation of that belief. But what had he done with it? Somewhere along the way, he had stopped thinking about the people who had helped him get there. Ben's voice echoed in his mind. "Do you believe in Christmas miracles?" At the time, Lucas had laughed and deflected the question, saying something vague about needing to see one to believe. But now, sitting alone in his pristine apartment, he wondered if he had missed a point. Maybe miracles weren't things you waited for. Maybe they were things you made happen. The next morning, Lucas found himself at his desk, scrolling through old emails and documents related to the diner. He had purchased the property years ago, intending to redevelop it into something profitable, but the project had stalled and been forgotten. Now, he saw it in a different light. The diner had been a place of community, a place where Jack had made everyone feel welcome. Lucas had been one of those people once. Could he honor that legacy? The idea felt right, but it also felt daunting. Lucas wasn't used to thinking about things in terms of sentiment or tradition. His entire career had been built on numbers and efficiency, not nostalgia. But as he stared at the plans for the abandoned diner, he felt a flicker of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Later that evening, Lucas visited Sarah and Ben again, feeling more at ease than he expected. Sarah opened the door with a warm smile, and Ben ran to greet him, holding up another one of his drawings. "This one's for you," Ben said, handing him a picture of a snowman standing in front of a building that looked suspiciously like Harrison Tower. Lucas chuckled. "I think this deserves a spot in my office." Ben's face lit up. Really? Really?" Lucas said, tucking the drawing into his coat pocket. "I'll hang it up where everyone can see." As they sat down together, Lucas found himself relaxing into their familiar rhythm. Ben chatted excitedly about school and Christmas, while Sarah filled the room with the scent of hot chocolate and freshly baked cookies. The simplicity of it all was disarming. Lucas couldn't remember the last time he'd spent an evening like this, without an agenda or a schedule to follow. At one point, Ben turned to him, his eyes shining with curiosity. "Do you believe in Christmas miracles now?" Lucas paused, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at Sarah, who smiled but said nothing, letting him answer. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think maybe I'm starting to." Ben grinned, satisfied with the response. "Good. Mom says miracles happen when you least expect them." Lucas nodded, his thoughts drifting to the diner and the idea that had been taking shape in his mind. He wasn't sure if it qualified as a miracle, but it felt like something important, something Jack would have been proud of. After Ben went to bed, Lucas stayed a little longer, helping Sarah clean up the kitchen. It was a small gesture, but one that felt oddly meaningful. As they worked side by side, he found himself opening up about his plans for the diner. "I've been thinking about Jack a lot," he admitted, "and about how much he gave me when I had nothing. I want to do something to honor that." Sarah looked at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and warmth. "What do you have in mind?" "I still own the property where the diner was," Lucas said. "It's been sitting empty for years. I want to bring it back, not just as a business, but as a place where people can come together like it used to be." Sarah's eyes softened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she smiled. He would have loved that. Lucas nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "It's the least I can do." As he left that night, Lucas felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but he knew one thing for certain. He wanted to make a difference, not just for Ben and Sarah, but for the community Jack had cherished. It was time to give back, to create something meaningful, just as Jack had once done for him. The cold night air bit at his face as he walked to his car, but he barely felt it. For the first time in years, Lucas wasn't thinking about the next deal or the next milestone. He was thinking about Jack, about Ben, and about the miracle of finding himself again in the most unexpected of places. Lucas's days grew busier after that evening with Sarah and Ben, but not in the way they used to. Instead of back-to-back meetings and deal negotiations, He was consumed by a single project that now felt like the most important undertaking of his life. The idea of restoring Jack's diner had taken root, and Lucas couldn't let it go. It was more than just a way to honor Jack's memory. It was a way to reconnect with the person he used to be, to show Ben and Sarah that the kindness Jack had shown him hadn't been in vain. The next morning, Lucas called his assistant, Emily, into his office. Emily was sharp and efficient, the kind of person who could make things happen without asking too many questions. "Emily," Lucas began, leaning back in his chair, "I need you to find the deeds to a property I own. It's an old diner. It used to be called Jack's Place. It's in the East Village." Emily jotted down notes, her pen moving swiftly. "What's the plan for it?" "I want it restored, completely renovated, but true to its original design. I'll need a team, contractors, designers, someone who specializes in retro interiors. I'll also need a chef to consult on the menu." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "And keep this off the books for now. It's a personal project." Emily's brow lifted slightly in surprise. Lucas rarely pursued anything personal, but she nodded without question. "I'll get started on this right away." "Thank you," Lucas said. As Emily left the room, he felt a strange mix of anticipation and doubt. He wasn't sure why this project felt so monumental, but he knew it had to be done right. Over the next few weeks, Lucas threw himself into the diner's restoration with a focus and determination that surprised even him. He spent hours reviewing old photos and layouts, making sure every detail was just right. He worked closely with the design team, ensuring the booths, counter stools, and lighting all captured the warmth and charm of the original diner. He even insisted on sourcing a jukebox similar to the one Jack had always kept in the corner, loaded with classic hits. At the same time, Lucas struggled with the scope of his vision. Would this really make a difference for Sarah and Ben? Would it truly honor Jack's legacy? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was falling short, that no amount of effort could repay the debt he owed Jack. One late evening, as Lucas sat in the dim light of his office, reviewing the project's progress, Emily knocked and entered with a cup of coffee. "You've been at this for hours," she said, setting the cup down. "Everything okay?" Lucas looked up, his usually confident demeanor softened. "Do you ever feel like you're trying to fix something you can't?" Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. I think everyone feels that way sometimes. But if you're trying, it means you care, and that's what counts." Lucas nodded, staring down at the blueprint spread across his desk. "Jack gave me so much when I had nothing. He didn't just give me a job. He gave me hope. And now that he's gone, I keep wondering if this is enough. If I'm doing right by him." Emily hesitated before replying, her voice thoughtful. "From everything you've told me, Jack sounded like the kind of person who would care more about the effort than the outcome. If you're doing this with the right intentions, it's more than enough." Lucas gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Emily." As the renovation progressed, Lucas decided to involve the community in subtle ways. He reached out to local artists to contribute murals and decorations that would bring life to the diner's walls. He also invited a few of Jack's former customers, people he remembered from those years working behind the counter, to share their memories and ideas. Despite his efforts, Lucas still kept the project a secret from Sarah and Ben. He wanted it to be a surprise, something that would bring them joy and remind them of the man Jack had been. But as the weeks passed, the weight of the secret grew heavier. Each time he visited their apartment, each time he saw Ben's grin and Sarah's quiet gratitude, he found himself yearning to tell them. One evening, while sitting with Sarah and Ben over cups of hot chocolate, Lucas almost let it slip. Ben was recounting a story about a Christmas pageant at school, his excitement contagious, and Sarah laughed as she helped him untangle his words. "You've got a way of making people feel at home," Lucas said to Sarah, almost without thinking. "Just like your father." Sarah smiled, her expression warm but tinged with sadness. "He always said the best thing you can do is make people feel like they belong." Lucas's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her then, to let her know what he was working on, but he held back. The surprise would be worth it, he told himself. It had to be. When the renovations were nearly complete, Lucas stood in the middle of the diner, taking it all in. The booths gleamed. The jukebox hummed softly, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with the comforting scent of coffee brewing in the newly installed machines. It felt right, like stepping back in time to a place that had once been full of laughter and life. But as he stood there, alone in the quiet space, the doubts crept back in. Was this enough? Could it ever be enough? The answer came to him in a memory. He was 18, standing in the same spot, staring at Jack as the older man handed him an apron. The grill's hot, kid. You up for it? Jack had asked, his tone light, but his expression full of belief. Jack hadn't waited for perfection. He hadn't needed grand gestures or guarantees. He had simply offered what he could in the moment with an open heart. Lucas smiled to himself, the memory steadying him. This diner wasn't just a tribute to Jack. It was a promise to carry forward the kindness that had changed his life. Now, all that remained was sharing it with the people who mattered most. Christmas Eve arrived, and Manhattan was alive with the glow of holiday lights. Snowflakes fell steadily, blanketing the streets in a soft white layer, muffling the usual noise of the city. Lucas stood at the window of his office, looking out over the twinkling skyline. Tonight was the night. After weeks of preparation, the time had come to share his project with Sarah and Ben. He'd kept his promise to visit regularly, but it had been difficult not to reveal what he was planning. The excitement, mixed with a hint of nervousness, had grown with each passing day. Now, everything was ready. The diner had been brought back to life, not just as a building, but as a place that could give others the same sense of belonging it had given him all those years ago. Lucas checked his watch and grabbed his coat. He'd arranged to pick up Sarah and Ben from their apartment under the pretense of a holiday outing. As he approached their building, the sound of laughter and carolers filled the air, blending with the jingling bells of a nearby Salvation Army volunteer. When Sarah opened the door, her face lit up in surprise at the sight of Lucas. "You're early," she said, adjusting the festive red scarf around her neck. "Figured I'd give you both some extra time to enjoy the evening," Lucas replied with a smile. His heart warmed when Ben rushed forward, his face glowing with excitement. "Where are we going?" Ben asked, tugging on Lucas's coat. "You didn't tell us anything." "It's a surprise," Lucas said, tapping his nose conspiratorially. "But I promise you'll like it." Sarah gave him a curious look as she locked the door behind them. "You've been full of surprises lately," she teased. The three of them walked through the snow-covered streets, the cold air nipping at their cheeks. Lucas kept the conversation light, though he could feel his nerves building as they neared their destination. Finally, they turned the corner, and the familiar shape of the diner came into view, its windows glowing warmly against the night. Ben's eyes widened, and he stopped in his tracks. "Is that?" he asked, pointing at the bright red neon sign above the door. The sign read Jack's Place, its letters glowing in the same welcoming style as the original. Lucas turned to Sarah, whose hand had flown to her mouth in shock. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's for both of you," Lucas said gently. "And for Jack. I wanted to bring back what he built, not just for me, but for everyone." Ben tugged at his mom's sleeve. "Can we go inside, Mom?" "Please." Sarah nodded, wiping at her eyes as she followed Lucas and Ben to the door. Inside, the diner was alive with the sights, sounds, and smells of a place meant to bring people together. The jukebox played a soft holiday tune. The booths gleamed under the warm lights, and the scent of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air. Ben ran ahead, taking in every detail. "It's just like the stories Grandpa used to tell," he exclaimed, bouncing with excitement. Sarah stood near the counter, her fingers tracing the polished wood. "You did all this?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "I had help," Lucas admitted with a small smile. "But it was important to me that everything felt just like it used to. Jack made this place special, and I wanted to honor that." Sarah turned to him, her eyes shining. "Lucas, it's incredible. But why?" "Because I owe everything to your father," Lucas said simply. "He gave me a chance when no one else would, and because I see so much of him in you and Ben. This diner, this is my way of saying thank you." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Lucas held up a hand. "There's more," he said, leading her to a small office at the back of the diner. He opened the door to reveal a desk stack with paperwork and a framed photo of Jack on the wall. "I want you to be my partner in running this place," Lucas said, meeting her gaze. "It's yours as much as it is mine. This isn't just about honoring Jack. It's about giving you and Ben the security you deserve," Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Sarah stared at him, her hand covering her mouth again. "Lucas, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said with a soft smile, "because I know this is what Jack would have wanted, and because I know you'll make him proud." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, and she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes. Thank you, Lucas." Back in the main dining area, Ben had discovered the jukebox and was flipping through a selection of songs. Lucas joined him, watching as the boy's face lit up with each new discovery. "Did Grandpa pick these songs?" Ben asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Some of them," Lucas said. "I try to keep it just like it was when I worked here." Ben grinned. "Can I pick one to play?" "Go for it," Lucas said, slipping a quarter into the machine. As the familiar tune of "Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree" began to play, Sarah joined them, her smile as bright as the lights outside. They sat together in one of the booths, sharing hot chocolate and cookies as the snow continued to fall outside. Before long, the door to the diner opened, and a few curious passers-by stepped inside. They looked around in awe, drawn by the warm glow and the inviting atmosphere. Lucas greeted them with a smile, explaining the diner's reopening and inviting them to join in the celebration. It didn't take long for the place to fill with life. Neighbors, old friends of Jack's, and even strangers passing by stopped in to experience the magic of Jack's place. Laughter and conversation filled the air, blending with the music and the clink of dishes. Lucas watched it all from behind the counter, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. This was what Jack had built, a place where people could come together, where kindness and connection were always on the menu. And now, thanks to Lucas, it was back. As the evening wore on, Sarah leaned over and whispered, "You've done something amazing here." Lucas shook his head. "We've done something amazing. This is just the beginning." Ben tugged at his sleeve, his eyes sparkling. "You were right, Mr. Harrison. Christmas miracles are real." Lucas smiled, feeling the truth of the words in his heart. "Yes, Ben, they are." The warmth of Jack's place lingered well into Christmas morning. After the grand reopening, Lucas had stayed late into the night, helping clean up and basking in the energy of the community that had filled the diner. It had been years since he felt so at ease, so connected to something beyond spreadsheets and quarterly goals. When Sarah invited him to spend Christmas Day with her and Ben, he hesitated at first, worried about intruding. But the look in Ben's eyes, hopeful and earnest, made his decision easy. Lucas found himself saying yes before he had time to think about it, and now, for the first time in years, he had no business obligations tugging at him, no schedule to adhere to, just the promise of a quiet, meaningful day with two people who had become far more important to him than he could have anticipated. By late morning, the three of them were gathered in Sarah's small apartment, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon and pine. Ben was eagerly tearing into his presents, his laughter filling the room as he uncovered books, art supplies, and a small model train set. Each gift seemed to bring him endless joy, and Lucas couldn't help but smile as he watched. "You didn't have to do all this," Sarah said softly, glancing at the neatly wrapped gift boxes Lucas had added to the pile under the tree. "I wanted to," Lucas replied, his voice sincere. "It's been a long time since I've been part of something like this. I'd forgotten how good it feels." Sarah smiled, her expression gentle. "Well, you've made it a Christmas to remember for both of us." Lucas nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate in his hands. This being here, sharing these moments, felt like something he'd been missing for years without even realizing it. After the presents were opened, they sat together at the small dining table, enjoying a simple but delicious Christmas lunch Sarah had prepared. Ben talked animatedly about his plans for the diner, already brainstorming ways to make it even better. Lucas listened with genuine interest, marveling at the boy's enthusiasm. "You're going to be a great partner," Lucas said, ruffling Ben's hair. "I might need you to keep me in line." Ben grinned. "I can do that." As the afternoon turned to evening, Sarah and Ben suggested returning to the diner for a while. Lucas agreed without hesitation, and soon they were back in the cozy space that had come alive the night before. A steady stream of people stopped by throughout the evening, drawn by the promise of warmth, community, and the lingering glow of Christmas spirit. Lucas watched as Sarah moved effortlessly behind the counter, her presence as welcoming as her father's had once been. Ben darted around the diner, helping to deliver cups of cocoa to guests and collecting compliments on his work. Lucas took it all in from a corner booth, sipping coffee and reflecting on how much his life had shifted in just a few short weeks. This place, these people, they had reminded him of something he'd lost along the way. The value of human connection, the joy of giving without expecting anything in return. For so long, he had measured his worth by his achievements, by the deals he closed and the accolades he received. But sitting here, surrounded by laughter and warmth, he realized how hollow those victories had been. True success wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the lives you touched and the legacy you left behind. As the evening wound down, a light snow began to fall, the flakes swirling gently outside the diner's frosted windows. Ben plopped down in the booth beside Lucas, his cheeks flushed from running around. "Do you think Grandpa Jack would like it?" Ben asked, his voice quieter than usual. Lucas looked down at the boy, his chest tightening with emotion. "I think he'd love it, Ben. And I think he'd be proud of you." Ben smiled, his face lighting up. "I'm proud of him, too." The words caught Lucas off guard, but they filled him with a deep sense of gratitude. Ben's honesty, his unwavering belief in Lucas, had been the spark that set everything in motion. Without it, Lucas might never have reconnected with the values Jack had taught him, or found the courage to change his life. As the last of the guests left, Lucas joined Sarah and Ben in tidying up the diner. The three of them worked together in comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of familiarity and trust. When they finally stepped outside, the snow was falling heavier, blanketing the city in a quiet stillness. Lucas looked up at the glowing neon sign one last time, the words Jack's Place casting a soft red hue on the snow below. He turned to Sarah and Ben, his heart full. "This is just the beginning," he said, "for all of us." Sarah nodded, her smile warm. "You've given us something amazing, Lucas." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You've given me something amazing. I just didn't know I needed it." As they walked back to Sarah's apartment, Lucas felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't sure what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let himself lose sight of what mattered again. This Christmas, he hadn't just honored Jack's memory. He had found a new family, a renewed purpose, and a reason to believe in miracles. And as he watched Ben skip ahead, his laughter echoing through the snowy streets, Lucas silently thanked the boy for reminding him of what it meant to truly live. As the snow falls gently outside the glowing neon sign of Jack's Place, Lucas's story reminds us of something truly timeless: the power of kindness, connection, and second chances. A little boy's honest words, a cherished memory, and the warmth of a family change one man's life and create a ripple effect that touched an entire community. This Christmas tale is a beautiful reminder that no matter how far we stray, it's never too late to come home to what matters most. And sometimes the smallest gestures, like a boy tugging on a coat or sharing a memory, can lead to the most profound transformations. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who could use a little holiday cheer, and subscribe for more feel-good stories that inspire and uplift. Let us know in the comments, what's the most meaningful act of kindness you've ever experienced? We'd love to hear your stories. Thank you for watching, and from all of us here, we wish you a warm, joyful, and miracle-filled holiday season. See you in the next video.